All right. Hello, everyone. This is Keith Owens here again with another episode of DSQ Live. I'm here with my co-host, Doc and McTyre, and we have our special guest, Abel Ramirez, frequent contributor. We're here to talk about his most recent story, and as well as some other things. But I want to have heavy focus on his most recent story, which is Dark. Tell us the name again, Abel. The name of your story, Dark Covenant. Dark Covenant. Dark Covenant. Yep. And but for those of you who don't know, we have our story about once a month. We have an episode of the DSQ Live. We had a bit of a pause during COVID, as did many people, but we're back on track, having our meeting about having our episodes once every month, and we hope you enjoy them. And sometimes we have guest writers to talk about various topics, talking about Detroit Stories Quarterly, talking about the stories, talking about all things sci-fi, particularly all things sci-fi Detroit. And so I think before I go any further, just want to let everybody know where they can find us. If you want to speak to us or reach us or comment on the episode, you can reach us on email at DetroitStoriesQuarterly@gmail.com. That's DetroitStoriesQuarterly@gmail.com. And also, if you want to visit our website, that is DetroitStoriesQuarterly.com. DetroitStoriesQuarterly.com, and that's where we store all these episodes, as well as all the past issues of Detroit Stories Quarterly. So you can get your copies there and see what we're up to, and etc. So with that, no further ado, I will pass this on to Doc, who will get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Keith. Yeah, this is a great time to be alive, isn't it, gentlemen? I mean, here we are having the opportunity to write about all of this exciting stuff, that, being able to have this venue, in fact, to do creative kinds of things the way we're doing. And so with that, just touching real quickly on what Keith mentioned, of course, our editions are in paperback and ebook form. So, be mindful of that. What we're talking about today is going to be found in our current edition, which is our fall 2021, winter 2022 edition. We got 5 awesome stories in there, but our focus today is going to be on 3 of those, the ones with each one of us wrote about. And here's our working theme. Our working theme is redemption. Each one of our stories, and of course, this is kind of an epiphany. Keith and I was having a kind of a post publishing-ish discussion, and I mentioned to him that I had noticed that my story, his, and Abel's all had like subtle kind of underlying redemption themes in them. And so we talked about it and said, okay, well let's see if we can bring this into our regular discussion, our DSQ discussion. And so that's how this came about. Just to set the stage, a little bit, I'll give a little bit of background about my story and each one of our stories, but then you're going to hear from each one of us. We'll go into more detail as to how our stories fit within the theme. Mine, which is the final version for the 4-part series with TT and Tess, the Detroit tech teenage sleuths, who in this particular one, I had a lot of fun with it. I was able to do some background exploration because I wanted to build their origin story. As it turns out, young ladies are actually related. The family, in fact, has roots in another dimension, a family, in fact, from another dimension, Dimension D. And this adventure eventually gets the youngest sister into Dimension D, where she encounters this great uncle who has these awesome superpowers that are steeped in like quantum physics and the linking of meditation and so forth as the way to create these very unique cycling devices. And in fact, he calls himself the cyclist. And the whole premise of the story is that there's this major kind of ecological disaster, kind of built more dealing with a biological monster that he's coming up against. And he trains Tess to get these skills, and then they go after it. And so With that, the redemptive piece comes in the form of something that I've worked with over the years in dealing with the whole quantum physics aspect, that there is an underlying kind of spiritual aspect to quantum mechanics and quantum physics. Einstein touched on it a little bit, and so did Professor Hawking in some of their work. And of course, nothing's ever been conclusive, but I always, using the writer's imagination, think of these wonderful forays into the fourth and fifth dimension aspects of science as potentially being a place where we have untapped connections, ultimately with what I would say is God. And as I wrap up my piece here, so the God aspect with me, of course, is that I am an ordained minister and what have you. So spiritual elements tend to weave their way into to our story here and there whenever I'm writing, if possible. This one in particular, I think played a really big role toward the end of the story. But I want to move on now to Abel's story, which he's going to talk about in just a moment, deals with the other end of the spectrum. His is a bit more on the darker perspective, and we're going to hear from him about how he focuses his stories in that particular area. But suffice it to say that Abel's story was so scary that if I recall correctly, Keith, while he was reviewing his story, texted me and said, "Man, Abel's story is dark as S." I'm not going to use the word, but we know Keith is not a man of few words, but he can be very direct, and you know what he meant by that. And he said, "Man, I don't even know if I can go to sleep after reviewing this thing." And of course, I felt I was a little nervous about the story too. But as we talk about Abel's story, we're going to see that in fact there was he actually has a wonderful redemptive element in there that brings forth. And then of course there's Keith's story, which is an ecological focus. It's the where does that alley go, right? Where does that alley? And it's the concluding part of that 3-part series. So Keith will be talking about in that just a minute. But Abel, we want to turn it over to you for a moment. Tell us a little bit about how this story came about. We know there's a family kind of connection to it a little bit, but tell us a little bit about how this story emerged and some of the influences that it served for you in order an inspiration to writing this story.
Well, I got the idea from my dad. The first part of the story, the main character meets this, he has a friend that comes over who's involved in the occult, and certain things happen, and it takes off from there. That part of the very first part of the story, my dad told me that his father said it happened to him. So that's where I got the idea from, and I always wondered, what would have happened if things were a little different. So in the story, the main character has an offer to say yes or no, and he says yes. But according to my grandfather said no, and that was the end of it. Mm-hmm. But I always wondered if he had said yes to this offer, right, what would have happened. And over the years, it just kind of stayed in my head, and just kind of came up with it from that, and just through a little bit of things from the occult that I research. And by the way, I'm not an occultist. I do.
Glad to hear that, young man.
Yeah, people can do whatever they want, but I just, research it. Yeah. And I think it makes for good storytelling sometimes. So that's kind of where it started and where why it happened. So
yeah, and I'm glad you qualified that about the occultist piece. It's interesting though, Abel. You've educated me in a lot of ways. As a man of God, I've gone the spectrum. I'm at the point now in my walk with the Lord where I am a bit of a Bible scholar now, and scholar in the more of the classic sense, where I really do try to bring some critical thinking into Bible study and so forth. One of the things that I have come away with is simply the truth, is that the Old Testament, all of this stuff about the occult and witchcraft, all of of this stuff is nothing new under the sun. This was quite the usual fare that's found in the Old Testament. And, and that was one of the reasons why the children of Israel stayed in trouble, because they often gravitated to these cultures that were different from theirs. And invariably, there would be some elements of paganism and that sort of thing. Ultimately, though, they would find their way back to redemption, but often with some struggle. So that struggle between good and evil has always been there. And some of the evil is like evil light. I mean, some of this, there's a lot to understand about these pieces. And I think you're writing for a reader who's open-minded and mature enough to be, to really take in some of those pieces. I think you can really educate people about how the occult plays a big role in pushing against religion and actually maybe strengthening faith and all of that as a result of understanding it deeper. So, but we'll get back to you in just a moment. Let's hear about Keith's story. Now Keith bring his piece, while mine is a bit more in the spiritual from the scientific standpoint. Abel is a bit more often traditional church, good and evil, devil, God kind of thing. Keith is focusing a little bit more on the humanism aspect. There's a major ecological issue going on, and people have to make some critical decisions. So go ahead, Keith, share with us your story and some of those ethical and moral challenges that your characters are facing.
Yeah, basically, like I say, this is the third in the series of Where Does the Alley Go? And the third part is called Into the Dawn. And basically, it's a story about a fictional Detroit, and somewhat similar to yours, Doc. I mean, there's more than one dimension involved. And this one is more than one Detroit. I mean, in the primary Detroit, which would be the Detroit where most of us are living, there have been rains for 5 years straight going on, and which has given rise to a whole different environmental issues, from plant life to physical animal life, of things that have kind of evolved and developed during that time very quickly due to the changing environmental conditions, which has changed the way people respond and everything else. So the whole city's changed, and at the beginning, and it's only affecting Detroit for some reason. And there's a lot of question about that and why that is, and people dealing with that in terms of whether or not they want to stay, they can stay if they're locked inside, and what's going on. The whole issue gets to I think just the feeling, just some of the feelings in Detroit about what's going on. The people some of the issues that people feeling about Detroit, going through a lot. Some of the things that have happened. So it's more or less some of the trials and tribulations of Detroit, but seen through an ecological lens. I mean, in terms of but also is dealing with what I call hardcore Detroiters. I mean, who just will not leave. And that's why I think I have the thing where this is something that's affecting Detroit, because at least in the beginning, they could leave if they want to, but most of them, they don't. And we've seen the same thing happen in Detroit during the heart. And now, I mean, Detroit's, the cool thing now. Everybody, the young people want to come and run, and there's all these things happening. But I know back when I moved here, back in '93, it was not. And people would call you crazy you moved to Detroit. But there's that hardcore group, the folks, there were those who left. There are those who didn't leave because they could not leave. And then there were those who could leave, but just refused because this was their town, and I think that's what I deal with a lot. It's just that, hardcore love of Detroit, that no matter what this city goes through, they're going to find a way to deal with it, one way or another. And so that's kind of what that story is about.
Yeah, and you've got some really good, I think, ethical and moral decisions that your characters have to make too, Keith. That I think links a little bit almost with Abel's story in that sense. And Abel, on that note, there was one character in your story, and I guess we start to talk a little bit about faith and good and evil and making decisions. There was this the one character who was basically telling the main character, don't do this, don't go after him, don't try to help him out. You go ahead and tell us a little bit about that character and the role that she played. I know that was, but you go ahead.
Yeah, that character is based on my grandmother. According to my dad, when this guy came over my grandfather's house and all this stuff happened, my grandmother warned him not to let the guy in because of the circumstances, what had happened. He didn't listen, and then it goes on from there. So yeah, there's always, it seems like there's always a warning for, just to get away from certain things or stay away from bad things. And it's up to you to want to do it or not, So
Right.
that's where the character came from. It was based on my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah, and just circling back to you, Keith, for just a moment, though, your characters also had to make some major decisions too, and of course, it impacted the direction, the ultimately the outcome of things. Without speaking, of course, without giving away the ending or what have you. What was some of your thinking in creating a little bit of that decision-making circumstances and within the plot? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's more of it's basically do we stay or do we go? And I think, like I mentioned before, there's the hardcore Detroiters, but then even with hardcore, you get to a point of how much more can you take? But then what choices do we have? And I think without giving out too much, like I said, there is an alternate Detroit, and without giving it, but there's challenges there too. And so the choice is, do we number one, are we really leaving Detroit if we leave? Because this is another Detroit.
Right.
And do we stay with the issues that we know, or do we go with the issues that we don't? And what's the pro and what's the con? And are we giving up? Are we giving up on the city if we live? Are we giving up, or are we challenging ourselves? I mean, is it what's the right thing to do? And so that's what that is.
Yeah, and I've told Keith this before, but one of the things that his story prompted in my thinking, based on that decision making, is the larger issue that we face as a civilization, as as a planet Earth during this time, in the early 21st century, in which we keep mismanaging the planet. So okay, we Elon Musk and those guys. They're trying to get us all to space, but what kind of stewardship are we taking? We go to another planet, same kind of issues that we had here, and then we're just destroying somewhere else. And I suppose that's that's fodder probably for some future Detroit stories dealing with this topic. But I really appreciate you prompting my thinking about this, Keith. And in fact, I'm using it actually doing some lectures right now in a class where some students are writing papers and they're dealing with some of these topics. So, and the same, I want to go to you with Abel in terms of, and again, not giving away too much of your story, but ultimately the decision that your character makes as we move toward the end of your story, though. The redemptive piece does emerge. Can you tell us a little bit about how it does, and I guess and how you as the author kind of decided to take him to that point because of something you were trying to communicate? Go ahead.
Yeah, the character that brought all this upon the main character. If it wasn't for him, all of this would have never happened. And then, it's years later that the second part of the story takes place. And the main character needs information. He needs to know what's going on. So he goes back to that guy and informs him of what's happening. And it's not good. So there's a bit of guilt that sits into this character, and he has to do something. He just has to do something and fix what he had done. So that's what he did. It was just his conscience that just got to him. And in the end, it really helped out. So.
Yeah, I know with my story, I think the biggest piece for me was, I mean, because I mentioned it was an origin story. So the Adelsworth, that's their last name, the girls, their family, they find, you know, that they have this extraordinary connection with another dimension, but also that there was a family member who, you know, passed away years ago. They find out that this individual was actually a great person and contributed a lot to where they are at this time, and then discovering these abilities, these superpowered abilities through the quantum physics and what have you, brings with it, you know, like that they say in Spider-Man, great power comes great responsibility. So to some extent, there is this sense of things kind of being brought together and like a new kind of insight emerging. I am coming away from my story feeling like I probably wouldn't want to deal with this again for maybe another year. But when I come back to it, I do think I want to bring a lot more of that spiritual aspect coming forward again, because I think it played a big role in shaping them into much more clearly defined characters. And so in our wrap up time, I just, you know, just hear from the two of you, and then I'll share just a very brief thought, and that is just one word that you, or a couple of words that you would say that each of our stories meant to you personally, in terms of the value you came away with from these stories.
Well, one thing I say, I think, like we're commenting on each other's stories, you know, and I think we got a little bit of time. I just wanted to say, particularly with Abel's story, is that I think when we're talking about the, you know, spirituality, but as well as the occult, but all of those things. I mean, you know, man and woman trying to find out who they are and why they're here. You know, and that's why people go to, I think, those things. You know, and you know, and they're figuring, you know, whether it's, you know, it's worship, whether it's the sun, you know, whether it's the moon, we don't worship, you know, God, whoever, you know, they're trying to figure out, explain things, you know, what makes sense of their surroundings and who they are. And I think the other aspect is things that happen. It used to be, you know, the sun would come up, that would scare people didn't know what that was. You know, something must be drawing, you know, the Romans had the thing, you know, where the God is Ares is pulling the sun in a chariot behind him, you know, and until you realize that's not it. But at the same time, you know that it's not all science, you know, and I think that's the thing that, you know, science explain. I've always believed that science, you know, science and God, and so they're not mutually exclusive. You know, a lot of people say, you know, say, I think that, you know, I think science is proof of God to me. I mean, that's, you know, that's what the proof is there. But I think, but at the same time, I think many of us, some of us choose to forget them. Other times, people maybe it didn't happen. But I know, Abel, you're talking about the event that happened to your father and grandfather and grandmother and things that, you know, the stories that were relayed to you about what happened. And I think I know I can remember things, you know, that happened that I know were not regular. You know, I mean, and I don't know if it's sometimes when you're young, your mind is more open, you know, because it wasn't just when I was tiny, but, you know, older. But certain things happened that you saw, you know, that I just knew. You know, I mean, you know, here, and sometimes it's scary, other times it's not necessarily, you know, but it's something, you know, this is not quite, you know, and I one thing I call obviously, you know, I know, and I'll wrap this up, but I know my mother was, you know, my mother died in 2016, and as she was dying, I remember we have conversations, and there would be things that she would see. You know, I mean, she would see sometimes, her, father or other people like that, you know, passing by somebody or a little boy in the room or other things like that. And what she, and sometimes, you know, I was telling her, I said, no, Mom, I said, no, you're seeing that. I said, but she said, do you see it? I said, no, but it's not for me to see, you know, so that's for you to see, you know. I said, that's not for me, but I had no doubt, you know, there's some of the, that was, and it wasn't delusional, you know, it wasn't that she was losing her mind. It was that she was starting to get that in between phase, you know, I mean, and started to see things here and see things there. And I remember, you know, at one point, you know, it was really kind of funny, but it's also kind of because when she kind of saw, you know, the side, and she said, well, do you want to come? And I started cracking up. I said, no, and I go, and she started laughing, and she
Say, not yet.
yeah, and mom looked at me. She goes, chicken. That's
Oh,
exactly what she
geez,
said. And
that's wow.
yeah, it was hilarious, and it was muscle for that. But it's like, she saw it, and she looked, and she says, well, do you want to, do you want to come? I said, no, Mom, I ain't going there, and she
Not ready.
No, that's right. It ain't happening, Yeah, she goes, chicken. I said, yeah, but it's the same thing. But it's like I knew she saw, I could tell she saw it. I could tell, and that was the thing. Just the same thing like I said with my father. And the only time I saw him after he passed, the reason why I remember I fell apart, crying, because when I saw him, you realize that he really that's when you realize there's a spirit, because he wasn't there. When my mother and my uncle brought me to say, because it's just last time to see Dad, and he was laid out, and I thought that would be the last time I'd be seeing him. And then when you see it's like a wax figure, because something is gone, and that's when it really hit that there's something else besides the flesh, because it was obviously not him, and so anyway, that's a long way, but that, I think, but those kind of, I think with those things that you invest, like I said, so when you do those kind of stories, Abel, and same thing with, like I said, you're talking to, but you do it in a whole different way with the kids, with TT and Tess, and the way that, and I told you, I said, the most recent addition to me really reminded me of stuff you see in Asimov's, because it was like, so the whole use of mathematics, and was so deep, Asimov's stuff, it's almost like you got to have a PhD to read some of that stuff, but at the same time, it's grounded, I think that just makes it good reading, so.
Yeah, and the resonating piece on that, the linking piece, was in fact meditation. That in fact he was able to integrate this through meditation and moving that into quantum physics and algorithms and all of that. Abel, you can offer your final word. I do want to tell our audience he's got an awesome work out there. Ravensgate Chronicles, I believe that is. Yeah.
The Ravensgate Chronicles, Unholy Awakening.
Yep. Unholy Awakening. There is a nun in there that will be unforgettable. I'm not going to say anything about it, but just suffice it to say, she's a little bit of James Bond, a little bit of whoever the woman would be today that is considered to be very stylish. I'll just put it that way. Good stuff, very interesting stuff. So.
But yeah, in terms of all of our stories, first of all, I like this issue. This is one of my favorite issues of DSQ. And what I really think about all of our stories is the fact that we talk about the realities that are out there. There's more than just one reality. Right. There's the real world, and there's another real world that we don't see all the time, whether it's the spiritual world or whether it's another dimension. And how this issue, in different ways, we all tackle that same idea about an unseen world.
Right.
So I think that's why it's one of my favorite issues.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith. Thank you for the awesome work that you continue to do with DSQ. And you have the last word, and we're looking to see everybody back real soon. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Like I said, well, again, I'm glad we're getting back on track with DSQ Live, and I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. We'll be back again in a month with another episode, and we'll have our next issue should be out in a few months. We've got, like I said, it's Detroit Stories Quarterly. So this last episode, which was fall winter 21-22, came out the last day of February. So probably towards in June, some point we'll be having our next issue. We've already got a lot of our submissions in, and as always, we encourage if you like to write, if you know somebody writes stories, particularly fantasy, horror, science fiction. We do take straight fiction as well, but if you just spread the word, we're always looking for new writers and artists as well. Actually, so spread the word, let people know. We would love to read your stuff and take a look at it, and so keep that going. And once again, if you want to send us a note or contact us, you can contact us at DetroitStoriesQuarterly@gmail.com. And if you want to go to our website and check out our most recent issues, or just look up this episode or others of DSQ Live, which are there too. You can go to DetroitStoriesQuarterly.com. And with that, everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for spending this portion of your day with us, and we will see everybody next time.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely.
Right.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.